There's a strange tunnel in Russia. For many years, there were rumors of car engines stalling in the middle of the tunnel, and there were many talks of excessive number of accidents happening in it. Although the accidents, some attributed to the extreme zigzagging shape of the tunnel itself. One night, a man was driving through the tunnel. He said there were no other cars in the tunnel. His car was the only vehicle in sight. He was driving at about the midpoint of the tunnel when his engine stalled. He tried to get the engine started again, but it just wouldn't turn over. Then suddenly, he could hear someone slamming on the window. He looked around and found some handprints on the passenger side window. He got the engine started again, but then he began hearing the slamming sound as it continued to drive out of the tunnel. The slamming sound stopped only after the car cleared the tunnel. When he arrived at home, he was so freaked out that he didn't even bother checking the car from the outside and just ran to his house. The next day, he came out of the house to check on his car and discovered that the handprints were actually made in blood. He took the car to the local car wash that was located right next to the gas station and asked for a full wash. One of the workers inspected the car inside out, then approached the owner and said, "The handprints were made from the inside and not from outside." Who or whatever had made those handprints were riding inside the car with the driver. This happened before elementary school, so I must have been 6 or 7 years old. My whole family used to visit and sleep over at our grandparents' place very often. I used to love spending time with grandma and grandpa, so I have lots of pleasant memories of them. At the time, we used to live in Osaka and my grandparents' place was located in Kyoto. That day, as we have many other days in the past, we just packed some essentials and drove to our grandparents' place. Once we arrived there, I didn't waste any time and went out to play with the children in the neighborhood. When I got back, my parents and my younger sister were gone. I asked Grandpa where they went, and he simply told me they had some business to take care of. I remember falling asleep on Grandma's lap after crying my eyes out. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was a little spoiled when I was a kid. Grandma knew that, so she did her best to calm me down and eventually fell asleep next to me. Hours must have passed when I was awoken by the sound of rain outside. When I opened my eyes, I could see the raindrops outside the window. Without much thought, I was just peacefully looking at the rain falling, gazing at the front door. The house was designed in L shape, so when you are in the room at the far end of the L, you could see the front door of the house. Seeing as how the time was around 2 a.m., there shouldn't have been anyone outside, but for some strange reason, there was a person lingering near the front door. The front door was wrapped in a reflective material. In my naive young mind, the thought had occurred that I should open the door for the person. I squirmed a little to try to get up, and Grandma, who I thought was sleeping, grabbed my shoulder to stop me and said, "Don't look and go back to sleep." At the time, I couldn't make sense of Grandma's odd behavior and asked her, "Why is that person lingering around our front door?" Grandma didn't say anything, and she just held me tighter. I was comforted by Grandma's hug, but I couldn't stop looking at the person. Then I realized something was definitely wrong with the situation. The clock on the wall clearly read 2:30 a.m., but outside it was too bright to be that late. I could now make out that the person outside was a woman. She had really long hair and was wearing a white dress. Almost as if sensing my gaze, she slowly turned her body and looked in my direction. I knew beyond any doubt the woman was looking at me intently, and then she began repeating, She almost looked frustrated that I kept her waiting outside, and she suddenly walked towards the bucket that was laying on the front lawn. She grabbed the bucket that was filled with rainwater and proceeded to pour it on her body. I was horrified and held on to Grandma as tightly as I could. I must have fallen asleep because the sun was already up by the time I opened my eyes again. In an instant, the fear of last night swept over me and I began crying like a little baby. I was still crying in my grandma's arms when my parents and sister arrived. As it turned out, they went to visit my uncle while I was busy playing with the children in town. They ended up spending the night at his place. I still remember it like yesterday, crying and screaming at my parents. I saw a ghost because you left without me. It's a shame that I can no longer ask Grandma what it was that I saw, but I still remember. Who was she? Why did she linger by the door, just staring at me, as if she was waiting for me to come out? My brother is a high school science teacher. He went out this one night to hang out with his friend. He told me that it was around 10 p.m. When he walked to the elevator, he saw a young kid and said, "Are you going down?" The kid simply smiled at him and said nothing. My brother thought it was a weird kid, but made nothing of it. By the time he returned home, it was around 2 a.m. He pushed the elevator call button. Then, on the elevator door, he saw the reflection of the same kid from earlier. He told me something felt very wrong, and he especially didn't like the fact that the kid kept smiling. Already freaked out, he didn't want to wait for the elevator and ride it together with the kid, so he opted to take the stairs instead. As he went up the stairs, he could feel the child walking a few paces behind him. He began running and was out of breath by the time he was inside the apartment. Once safely home, he woke Mom up and told her what had just happened. She told him he was acting silly and that it was only a coincidence. Having already forgotten about the incident of last night, the following day, my brother went out again late at night to go out drinking with his friends. He came back home even later that night at 3 a.m. and he nearly shit himself when he saw the creepy smiling kid again by the elevator. He ran like he had just seen a ghost and fortunately got home safe again. The next day, he went to the security office to speak to the guards about the incident. The security guard wouldn't give him straight answers and only gave him generic advice. But my brother could feel the guard knew more than he was letting on. My brother pressed the security guard harder and he began to open up. "Don't tell anyone I told you this, because this is going to get me fired if my boss finds out. A few years ago, there was a kid who was bullied all the time by other kids in the apartment complex. I didn't see it myself, but I did hear things weren't that much better in school. One day, we had to close access to one of the elevators because of the door malfunction on the 11th floor. The door was open about 1/3 of the way, so we blocked the bottom end with a mop bucket, and then we had the caution tape taped at the top end to warn all residents. The kid took his own life that night by jumping into the elevator shaft. Ever since the accident, there have been many residents who have complained of the same thing you're telling me now. That's all I can tell you, and you'll have to judge for yourself what you actually saw last night." My brother saw the kid 3 more times thereafter, and that was the last time he came home. He's been staying at his friend's ever since, and has no plans to move back in. I have a close friend who's a few years younger than me. I'll call her Suyeon for this story. She's one of those people who are more sensitive of the paranormal. Not crazy sensitive like I see spirits, but more like she feels the presence of non-human beings sometimes. Bottom line is, she experienced more weird things than most other people. The neighborhood she lived in was famously known to be inhabited by a large number of psychics or mediums, choose your word. She used to tell me all the time how spooky it was to walk to and from school every day. Some psychics hung skulls by their front door, fake or real, I don't know, and some others walked the streets with some sort of whips in their hands, and they would hit the walls, ground, and other objects with them. My friend was walking home late at night after school when an elderly man walking towards her from the opposite direction said, passing her by, "Get that thing off your shoulder before you go home." She looked at her shoulder and found nothing, so she flicked her shoulder a couple of times and kept walking. She took a shower at first when she got home and went into her room afterwards. That's when she heard the front door slam. "Mom, is that you?" No one answered, so she thought the wind must have knocked something off. But being alone at home late at night, she felt a bit lonely, so she picked up the phone to call her parents and found out they still had another 2 hours drive to arrive home. She did the next best thing and turned the TV on. But then she heard the door slamming once again, followed by the sound of footsteps. Soo-yeon sat frozen on the couch as the footstep could be heard closer and closer, but she could see no one anywhere near her. Feeling helpless and scared out of her mind, she slid under the blanket in fetal position and covered her ears with her hands. A short time thereafter, it got quiet, very quiet. Curious, Soo-yeon lifted her hands off her ears, and then she heard,
"Mommy's home."
The voice was coming from the outside of the blanket, and she knew it couldn't be her mom since she wasn't due home for another hour at the very least. The voice of the woman outside had a tinge of metallic sound, and she spoke in a slightly lower tone than her mom. Terrified, she stayed under the blanket, knowing fully well the little to no protection it provided. She covered her ears again, and the voice seemed to disappear. She lifted her hands to listen in again, and that's when something whispered in her ear.
"I said I'm home. Why aren't you looking at me?"
Powerless and petrified, she covered her ears again and stayed under the blanket until her parents came home. From that day, my friend has developed a habit of shaking her body and sweeping the seemingly invisible dust off her clothes. At least that's how it looks to the average person. But it's actually her way of detaching any unwanted spirits off her. But the ritual doesn't exist in any books, nor is it practiced by any mediums or psychics. I accompanied her one time when she visited a psychic to discuss her experience. The psychic told my friend that all she needs to do is to build a mental wall between her and the spirits. The spirits fear us more than we fear them, so as long as we don't give them any credence, they cannot manifest in our world. The good news is that my friend is fine now, but the bad news, and I don't know if I can call it a bad news, but I've been thinking, my friend is one of the most mentally strong and stable person I know, as evidenced by her capability to live a perfectly normal life, even with her sensitivity to the paranormal. So, if the spirits can haunt a person like her, how easy would it be to do the same to someone as fearful of the paranormal like myself? Alright, that's it for this video, and I hope you all enjoyed the stories. The last two videos I've uploaded creepypastas, and it was clear from your reactions that most of you prefer the subscriber submitted and the true scary stories. So going forward, I will not be doing creepypastas anymore because I listen to you guys. I would also like to let you know that I started posting scary stories on my Facebook page. Those are basically stories that I haven't done on this channel, and they are in text format. So if you like reading and if you want more scary stories, then be sure to like my page and stay updated with new stories. Lastly, I would like to thank you guys for all your kind words while I was ill. It didn't help me with the flu, but it definitely made me feel better. Alright, like, subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe.